Just Outdoors is brought to you in part by
Scheierl Hardware Inc., Deer River. Scheierl Hardware offers a broad selection of paints and sporting goods and a complete line of plumbing and electrical supplies. Scheierl Hardware, 108 Main Avenue, Deer River.
Hi folks, my name is Tom Chapin and welcome to Just Outdoors. This is a program to bring you the bare facts about the woods, waters, and wildlife of Itasca County. And today we have a special program. We're going to be talking about the Izaak Walton League. A lot of you folks don't know what the Izaak Walton League does, even if there's a local chapter. We're going to talk about, there is a local chapter. It's called the West Libbey Northern Lakes chapter in Grand Rapids here. And I used to belong to the Izaak Walton League many, many years ago, and now I'm back in it again. And it's a great organization, and it's a conservation organization. It's a protector of our resources. It does a lot of good in this area and the country. And we're going to specifically talk about things that they do here locally. And so let's talk to my guests. My guests are members of the local chapter, and the first guest we have here is Bob Scheierl, and you are the president, Bob. Welcome to the club.
Hi, Tom.
And welcome to the talk.
Thank you.
And we'll be talking to you. So you are the president, so you're going to know a lot about the local club. and of course, Rich Libbey. Most people know Rich Libbey around the Grand Rapids area here, and your dad was specifically. He kind of almost started this group in Grand Rapids, isn't that correct?
He did start it. He started back in 1934.
1934.
Yeah.
So we've got some history here too.
Right.
But what I'd like, just a minute or two on each of you. Tell us a little about yourself, Bob, and what you've done over the years and what brought you into this group. Maybe that's the best way to do it.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I grew up in Painesville, Minnesota, south central Minnesota, on a dairy farm there. Went to school at the University of Minnesota in forestry, got my bachelor's degree and master's degree there. As far as my master's work there, I worked on the Copper River Delta in Alaska for 2 summers.
Wow.
So I enjoyed that. And after that, I saw an opportunity to come to Itasca County to do some work. I had been deer hunting up here as a kid with my dad.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to come up here and work, so I did that seasonally for a year and a half. Worked with the Itasca County Land Department and the Minnesota DNR and Wildlife seasonally. And then I got on full-time with the Land Department in 1979. Worked there for 35 years, retired there in 2014. I joined the Izaak Walton League in about 2000. Been active there in that chapter, in the chapter ever since. Became the president a few years ago, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was elected president. I was also the chapter representative to the state division in their board of directors, and I've been serving in that role probably for 8-10 years. I also serve as the on the resolutions committee on the state Izaak Walton League division level.
Okay, we're going to be talking about all those levels here today.
Right.
And obviously you moved to Itasca County and you probably really appreciate the area here.
Oh yeah, I got it.
And a lot of it has to do with what the Izaak Walton League is about, and that's preserving public waters and public lands, right?
Correct.
That's basically it, isn't it?
Yeah, we'll be getting into all that stuff.
Okay, really good. Okay, Rich, tell us a little about yourself. I know you're born and bred here, right?
Yep, I was born and raised in Grand Rapids. I grew up on Ice Lake, right next to the fairgrounds. It was the edge of town at that time. There was a sheep farm across the road. Now it's a housing development. So we had lived on on Ice Lake and got to enjoy the waters there. And we bought a house on Pekegama Lake when I was up in a junior high And I went off to college, and I graduated from Carleton College with a 4-year degree in biology. And then I taught a program for dropout students in Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis for 2 years, but anytime I had a break at Carleton or down there, it was heading
north,
back up north.
Like a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah. I took a quick 1-month backpacking trip through Mexico that was interesting, and came back here, and I had a degree in biology, but no technical part of it, just the BA. So I tried to find a job in biology, couldn't, so I kind of worked some odd jobs here and there, and I finally got a job as a guard at Minnesota Power, and then I got on with the construction company that built units 3, 4, and 4, and then I got on with the plant after 7 years and started as a janitor, and then a operator in the plant, and then I became a meter reader, covered the territory for between Big Fork, Deer River, and Marble, and Calumet, and then got back at Boswell again when they went to automated readers. And then I got into the control room and ran units 1 and 2 for a number of years, and 28 years retired. But I was always interested in the outdoors, and it's kind of ironic I got hired at Boswell because I testified when they were doing that environmental impact statement on Unit 4 that I wanted to have the strictest possible pollution control they could, and they called me the college-educated tree hugger at the plant.
Well, you know, you got a good background here in Itasca County. I mean, you've grown up here and everything, and with your job, you could see the good things that we have here and the resources, and they have to be protected.
Right.
I mean, it's got to be protected. There's somebody battling all the time, trying to take that away from our public rights and having public land and waters. And so that's what this organization is about, I believe. I mean, that's what I feel. I look at it. And you're part of the Pokegama Lake Association for many years, and it's probably still are. And, and so that's a big deal too. You know, that's our biggest lake in the county. So
that started with the development on Pokegama Lake. That's how I got involved. They developed all the mining company lands back in the
on the west
80s,
side,
north and west.
Okay. I'll just throw it out to both of you. Izaak Walton League. You got a local chapter, you've got state chapters, you've got the federal. Is the Izaak Walton League just a national group? Is it international too? Does it go to other countries, or just mostly national?
Just national.
National,
from what
okay.
I understand.
All right.
So,
So tell us the basics of the Izaak Walton League. What's their mission statement? Why would I want to join the Izaak Walton League if I was interested in protecting nature?
Okay, yeah. Our mission statement is to conserve, restore, and promote the sustainable use and enjoyment of our natural resources, including soil, air, water, woods, and wildlife. So it covers the whole range. They're involved in a lot of different issues. And of course, we're structured at 3 different levels. At the national level, we have 40,000 members.
Okay, there's 40,000 members in this country.
Nationwide, yeah.
Nationwide, okay. That's
in
not a
300
small
chapters, 300 different chapters. Okay. And there's and we're also organized at the state level with, we have about 1,000 members and 16 chapters. And of course, we're at the chapter level. Issues-wise, the national deals with national issues, of course. They've got 15 full-time staff that deal with those types of things. A real important issue, one of the big issues at the national level is the Farm Bill. It's probably the biggest expenditure of environmental programs in the country when you look at the incentives that are included in the Farm Bill. They amount to about, the conservation part of the Farm Bill amounts to about 7% of the Farm Bill. And that amounts to about $6 billion a year. Wow. And that's money that goes to farmers to encourage them through incentive payments to do conservation, to adapt conservation
farms
practices.
Are a huge effect on our research.
Huge,
I mean, it's just
huge.
And air quality too.
Oh, exactly, exactly. So. And part of that also is in the work done on that is to protect our grasslands. Grasslands are very environmentally more protective than, let's say, row crop type land. So they try to build an incentive in there to retain grasslands in the native prairies, kind of a thing.
Okay. let's talk a little about the history of the Izaak Walton League. You know, it goes back to how far? It says right there, 1922.
Started
Right?
in 1922. This is our centennial year, so
100 years.
it's a big year. Yeah, back in 1922, there was a group of anglers and hunters that were interested in, or were concerned about what was happening out
So
there.
it was started out as a hunting and fishing protective group.
Right. And
Okay,
that
which
was
is
the background.
what we want to hear here.
Right.
Okay.
And they were concerned about, the pollution that was happening at that time, water pollution, air pollution.
Yeah. Oh.
And there was also of course, the commercial hunting and fishing that was
Yes.
going on. So you had the market hunting. And so our game populations were getting depleted seriously, and along with the fisheries. So they created this organization to get kind of a lobbying strength for going to Congress and asking for some changes.
And it still is a lobbying outfit.
Right.
To an extent, right?
We're not really a lobby organization, but we deal with natural resource issues and work with politicians or legislators in creating policies that are environmentally.
So I take that as there's representatives of the government that ask your opinion on things.
Right.
And that's
the Ikes are known, amongst legislators, and so they're hopefully we have a respected position in terms of where we stand on issues. One of the early issues that even in the 1920s already, shortly after we were created, the Ikes at the national level were instrumental in protecting the Superior National Forest, which now has the Boundary Waters. Apparently, the Boundary Waters was even at that time was a popular place for canoeing nationally, and there was a need to protect that from development at that time, and they were involved at that time already.
okay. Well, Rich, tell us about preservation. I mean, as far as what the club does or tries to do statewide and locally.
Okay, well, basically we're trying to protect our natural resources here for future generations to enjoy. And that includes the forests, the lakes, the public lands, and we've really been concentrating on retaining our public ownership. You've seen what's happened to the lakes around here, with everything being lotted off and sold, and there's a drive. Some people think there's too much public land. We ought to have it turned into private and sold to private people so we can generate tax base. But
Do you have an answer for that?
well, let people know that the public land is our land.
That's correct.
Everyone says it's public land. Well, it's actually our land to use, and once you sell it, it's gone. So.
Yep.
What we need to do is, like they did, when we first came here, there was no zoning back when the Ikes first started. They started we started in 1934 up here. And like Bob said, it was a fish and wildlife group. They were concerned mainly with getting limits on fishing, hunting, and so forth. And it's carried on all the way through. My dad was at all the in charge of the Ikes back then, and they set up their own little park. I see back in 1948, they sent a resolution to Grand Rapids City Council to retain all public lands within the city of Grand Rapids. So it's been going on for a long time. When I was with the Pecame Lake Association, we saved Drumbeater Island, Nesbitt Island, Chisholm Point Island, Sugar Beach, and the Bass Brook Wildlife Management Area. So anyway, you can purchase land or convince the legislators not to sell land, which is now being done with school trust land that Bob will get into later. But we've worked with the county. My dad helped set up the Pecame Lake Association. He was in on that. He helped set up Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. The Ikes were involved in that, a lot of the Ikes. And originally, a lot of the Ikes were like a wildlife magnet and Rotary, Kiwanis, and everybody joined in. They'd have bullhead feeds, and hundreds of people would show up, and they'd talk about preserving Mother Nature for everybody.
Well, you can have, like it started out, fish and wildlife and that, but you still have to, you talk about numbers and that and dwindling, but some of the reasons it's dwindling, a lot of it, and not just people, it's the habitat itself. They have to have a place to live.
Right.
And
So do we.
And the place that they live has to be of quality. And if in a club like this, organization like this, a league, is what you're after, isn't it? To preserve the quality of what these we enjoy, the fish and game,
Right.
and where they live. And boy, you know, in my tenure here, I've seen a lot of it being destroyed by pretty much indiscriminate use of lakeshore. And things like that, where, you know, the once that goes into private hands, it's gone for the use by you and I at any time. So that's a big part of it, isn't it?
That certainly
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So
The DNR just sold a school trust piece on Pekegam Lake. It's a 20-acre point with 2,000 feet of lakeshore, and it was managed by the state, and they sold it and turned it into, you know, private party.
Yeah.
They're going to treat it nicely, they said.
well, you
Yeah.
hope so, and they
Yeah,
hope the
but-
regulations are in place for them to do that. But you have to have enforcement of that, don't
You
you?
certainly do. That was your job, Tom. 'cause-
Well, yeah, but I mean, at all levels,
Yeah.
you know, the county level was the most important on that, some of
Right.
it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That,
Right,
boy,
right, the local level.
you may have rules for how many trees you can cut and where you can cut along the lake and so on, but if it continues to go on, probably no enforcement involved there. Somebody has to come around and say, hey, this has got to stop. But anyway, maybe one of you, maybe Bob, you talk about school trust land. What is that? There's the folks out there. What is school trust land, and how much of it is there?
Yeah. School trust lands are lands that were conveyed to the state in our example be the state of Minnesota back when it was created a state, made into a state back in 1858. As part of that process, the federal government would convey federal lands directly to the state, a certain acreage. And in this case, sections 16 and 36 of every section was conveyed directly to the state for school purposes, or for the use of schools, is the way
For education.
right.
Right.
And the goal was to encourage states to create a public education system, and it was very effective in that. You know, Minnesota has probably one of the best education systems in the state.
So that's where a lot of the money came from the land. Huh?
That was the intent of those conveyances was to create that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what the deal was, so the state gets these lands, and the one thing they did with them was they put the old country schools on them. I don't know if you're familiar with the country schools. I went to one through
We
Sixth
had
Street.
them where I grew up too. Yeah.
And so if you look at the map where the country schools are, they're in sections 16 and 36,
They
like these down in
are.
farm country.
Well, and that's a corner of a square mile, isn't it?
Yeah, so it only takes an acre or two for that.
Yeah.
So the rest of the land, down in ag country, they would sell off. And the state constitution requires that the income from those lands, all school trust lands, goes into a permanent school fund. And the interest from that fund is what gets fed back to the schools. So Minnesota, between the original conveyance there and a couple of conveyances after that from the federal government for that purpose, got a total of 8 million acres for school trust. And of that, they sold off about 69% of it, mostly all down in ag country. But a lot of the school trust lands up here are still owned by the state. And actually, we have about 2.5 million acres of school trust land
What
left.
percentage of the state land is school trust land?
It's about 44%.
Wow. So there's 44% of the state land that we use.
That's the DNR
I
land.
use,
The DNR land
is school trust
is school
land.
trust land, and
And that has special implications.
right in terms of how it can be managed.
Okay, as far as being sold by the state,
It has to.
it's special, right? I mean,
Right, it has to be sold through auction
Okay.
when it is sold. The biggest thing is it has to be managed for income. So, timber growing lands have been retained largely by the state for growing timber, and they're, the mining lands, of course, have been retained for mining purposes. A lot of your minerals are on state lands, and in addition to the the lands that are the 2.5 million acres that the state owns that has mineral rights, they also own an extra 1 million acres of mineral rights.
One of you, is the state selling land? No, I mean, are we losing state land, gaining, or is it always about the same?
Well,
Anybody? We'll say state land. I was going to say public, but let's start with state.
Because they were supposed to maximize profits on the school trust land, the DNR was instructed to categorize all their land as productive and non-productive. And it turned out that, like Bob said, forestry and mining that produced 95% of the income to the trust.
Yeah.
But all lakeshore basically was considered non-productive because it's not, even though it provides public benefits from water quality, aquatic management point of view, public enjoyment, increased value of property on the lake. But so they've actually been selling lakeshore bit by bit by bit. And like I said, they just sold that 20-acre point on Kegma Lake. They sold 2 larger parcels on split hand. And
could that ever be changed?
Yes, it is. In fact, that law that said they'd maximize their profits was only enacted about 10 years ago. And that could be reversed. And as part of that,
wouldn't we want it to be reversed as the public? So we'd have more access to lakes?
Right, and also a lot of this lakeshore has our public accesses on it. And so there's talk about the DNR condemning the land. They can condemn it and buy it, but you need money to do that. So they either buy out the trust or else get the trust to hold this for future educational benefit for the kids. Say, hey, here's some undeveloped lakeshore, enjoy it. So the amount of money that comes in from selling that lakeshore is like, maybe, I can't remember, it was 25 cents or $1 a year per student when it costs $10,000 to educate them. So it's, we'd really like them to retain all that lakeshore.
Yeah, when people think about public land, they don't realize there's basically 3 different types. You know, you got the federal lands, state, and the county. Are there a lot of different ways those are being managed and sold off or used between the 3? Are you all kind of together on this as far as preserving certain elements of those lands?
I think each organization is committed, you know, those different levels. Like you say, there's a federal government, Chipotle National Forest. They own about 1/3 of the public land in Itasca County.
1/3?
Yep, Itasca County manages about 1/3, tax forfeit lands, about 300,000 acres. And the state owns about 1/3. You know, school trust.
That's an easy one to remember then.
Right.
Okay.
The state, the school trust lands in Itasca County is about 293,000 acres, so it's substantial.
Yeah.
It's most all of the state land within the county that's managed certainly by timber.
That's what I'm saying. The management is mostly timber, isn't it?
Yeah, largely, but you know, recreation's huge. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, your snowmobile trails, you know, all your hiking trails. And Rick mentioned the public accesses, a lot of them are on public lands. And those lands, you know, the school trust has to be compensated on those school trust lands. So the state now is renting some of them lands from the school trust. They have to either pay rent or buy them. And they would prefer to buy because in the long run that would be less. But where they can't, they have to pay rent, even on these snowmobiles and trails. The state has to pay rent on that.
So one thing the public's going to learn here, if they don't retain anything else, is that our lands here are still producing monies for education.
Right.
Continually. Is it like that in all states?
Yeah, the federal government, I think, did this type of conveyance to most all the states. And they are under that same, you know, congressional act, so they have to manage them for school purposes. Now, they manage them, some of them manage them a little differently in terms of how they handle the revenues. Some states, they're allowed to, or the state's structured so that like annual rents didn't have to go into a permanent school fund. See, right now in Minnesota, everything has to go into a permanent school fund, and only the dividends and interest can be spent up for the schools. In some states, they allow the rent to go directly to the schools. So instead of getting 2 or 3% back on that rent to go to schools, they get the full amount that year, but yet they're not losing any income potential because the value is still there. So it's renewable income they're allowed to go directly, and
So
that makes a
northern
big difference.
Minnesota is a big one, part of it, of the state of Minnesota. Northern Minnesota has the majority of that, I suppose.
Of the school trust lands,
Good
yeah.
trust lands, yeah.
Another impact of that mandate to maximize profits was the effect on our forests, because they didn't think the DNR was generating enough income. So in order to maximize the income, they used to let poplar trees, aspen trees grow to 50, 60 years, and we're continuing to mature and harvest them. Now they've ratcheted it down to 35 years. So every 35 years, the aspen forests are set up to be, harvested again. So it barely gets to be to a point where you've got denning trees for wildlife, diversity, and now with the Blandon's closed they're one of their lines, which relieved the pressure, but now with Huber wood products going in, they're going to use 400,000 to 500,000 cords a year for the next 30 years, and that's all aspen. So the Ikes are concerned about the impact on our forest with that short rotation. We'd like to see the rotation age put back up where it was to provide more diversity in the forest.
Do you think this will improve in the future? So they'll figure it out that you got to cut the right age trees to sustain the forest.
One would hope so, and they will. See, right now we're kind of in an aspen shortage in the sense that the aspen was all of one age. Right after the fires in the 30s and all that, we had all this aspen. When I was a forester in the field setting up timber sales, we had the opposite problem. We had all kinds of old timber, and we're trying to get it cut before it falls over. And of course, that meant lots of habitat for the den. Those species that need those old growth forests, well, that all got eventually logged off or fell over, but mostly logged off on county lands. So now you got this little gap until those trees regrow. Prior to when I was active out there, there wasn't as much cutting. So those are the trees that they have to cut now, which there weren't many. Now when those forests come back, the ones that I was involved with, in probably another 10 years, yeah, then we'll have lots of forests again, and it'll be a lot easier to get that rotation age extended up to more like, we'd like to see more like 60 years, so you have a chance for more of these
dead-using trees, more mature trees.
For these species that need bigger trees.
But when you have a process like in Cohasset coming in, that puts a real pressure on the forest, doesn't it?
For a short time.
For a short time.
I mean, certainly in the short run in terms of age.
Yeah.
Which means they have to go out further for wood. They're going to have to, look harder on private land.
Yeah. Well, private land produces quite a bit, right?
Yeah, but the thing about, public lands, when mills are siting places to go, the county forest lands, for instance, what I was involved with, we were real active in managing our forests, and so they knew that timber was going to be available. When you get on private, we would call it private, some of those folks, they want to harvest it, for their deer hunting and this, but there's others that, I like to look at those trees. I don't want to harvest that. So it gets to be an unreliable source.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Though, since I don't know, the snowmobile trails went in the early 70s, late 60s, and the coordination it took for all these agencies, the three agencies, to have a trail go through each one of their forests is really spectacular right now. When you think that when you're driving a snowmobile on a trail, you're going through all these entities, these government entities, and yet it's open to everybody. Yep. And as you're going through here, you'll see areas of logged areas. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with logging a forest, is there? I mean, it's basically very beneficial if you do it right.
Right. It's all about balance,
Yeah.
We can harvest the timber, but we also have to make provisions for those species that need that older timber. So we leave some reserve areas or here and there. Yeah. And if we can extend the rotation ages a little bit, there's things we can do. To achieve that balance, where we get to utilize the resource, but
balance seems to be the big thing. Pretty hard to find a grouse in a mature popple stand,
Yeah. You need
I mean, everybody knows that, and all kinds of other species that come in, and you have to have the sunlight come in and all that. But the more I see as I go through the forest, they're taking different little sections out. They aren't cutting everything down, and I think that's part of the balance, right?
Right.
That's all.
Right.
All right. Let's talk locally here now. What are you doing locally? You got
Do we want to get in? I guess
Well,
we
Rich,
kind of covered the history already. Do you want to get?
How about natural areas?
Yeah,
Naturally-
let's talk. What can a person in Grand Rapids look at the Izaak Walton League and say they helped or assisted or are working on these specific projects?
Well, one thing that was done back in '67, the Izaak Walton was kind of out in front of this. They got the county to set aside 6 natural areas across the county, in different parts of the county. They're scattered around the county, and
We can put this in later, but here, you want to put
right.
them out there? We'll throw that in at the end there.
They're scattered around the county, and there's about 3,000 acres in all, and they were set aside by the county board at that time, and for basically 3 purposes. One was scientific, for scientific purposes, historical, and then what they call aesthetic or spiritual purposes.
Okay, so there's certain things that are restricted on those lands.
Right.
One of them would be logging, I suppose.
Well, yeah, but logging's not restricted.
How about hunting?
No, hunting's
No?
allowed.
Hunting allowed,
Hunting's
okay.
allowed. Motorized use is restricted. Additional road building is restricted.
Okay.
But
That's 3,000 acres. Just in the
3,000 acres in all,
All
yeah.
right, and so the Ikes were involved with that
Yeah,
pretty heavily. All right, that's one.
Right. So, and of course, there's other issues we deal with regularly. Another one is the lead issue.
Right.
Oh, the lead issue as far as the hunting ammunition?
Ammunition
Really?
and fishing tackle. You know,
Okay.
Minnesota is a big hunting and fishing state, so it's an issue here.
So what is your stand as the Izaak Walton League on that lead issue?
Well, we like to see it phased out. You know,
Okay.
as far as hunting, you know, gun ranges isn't an issue because things are confined. But I mean, when you get out and spreading lead out in the environment, I mean,
I think the science is catching up with that, isn't it?
right. There's studies on eagles that show they're actually having population level effects from eagles eating gut piles, basically, which have lead fragments. Which you had a show on that showed how that lead fragments.
Yeah,
in
it's
those.
amazing. What they say, just one little pellet, this number 6 shot, is
Right.
enough to kill a bald eagle.
Yep.
And that's not hard to find
right.
in the environment anymore, is it?
Right. And then you got loons and the issue there with ingesting lead sinkers and this type of thing. A few years ago, we sent a letter out to the local sporting goods stores and encouraging them to sell more non-toxic tackle. You know.
What was their reaction to that locally here? Was it?
Well, we
is
sent the letter out, and I noticed it showing up more now. So
Okay, well.
maybe we had something to do with that.
Hopefully.
So that's
All right.
we're glad to see that. Basically, we just encourage them to make it available so people wouldn't have to buy it online.
Yeah.
We'd rather see them buy it in town. You know.
You know, I always like to follow the science because that's basically all we have. And we're always working on that because it changes and we learn more and more and more. And boy, they're really getting on this right now. This is a big national thing too, isn't it? We're not the only state working on this.
Right.
Are we?
Right.
And you know, being in the job I had, I saw a lot of animals that died from lead poisoning. They were brought to me and I said, well, they have lead poisoning. This is the way they act. And it only takes 20 days to kill a duck. And, you know, it's not from being shot, it's from ingesting the lead. And that's the big thing. And boy, you talk hawks, owls, and everything, and crows and ravens and everything you see on these gut piles and dead deer along the road. It doesn't take much. So it's a good thing.
You
Good
bet.
thing. Okay.
Another local issue is solar electricity.
There you go.
You've probably seen the array there out by the airport.
Tell us about that.
Well, there
A
was
lot of people have questions on that.
there was a group of individuals locally.
This is out by the airport now. As you go past the airport on the airport road, it'd be on the right-hand side,
Right.
past some new apartment buildings there, and it's an array of all kinds of.
Yep.
I don't know how many they have there, but what do you know about that, and how does the ICE get involved?
Well, there's been a group of people working on that for quite a while. You know, one of our members was active in that, Art Norton, and they and eventually they got this thing to go. It took a while, but they got it to go. And Minnesota Power and Light and Grand Rapids City got together and put in this array. I think it's on 17 acres. It's a 2 megawatt facility, And when it's done, it's supposed to be able to provide like 8% of the electricity in Grand Rapids.
That's a lot.
That's significant, yeah.
Really?
And that's supposed to, I checked, and I guess that's supposed to be operating here starting in April, from what I understand.
This year?
This year, yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, boy, that's amazing, because when they cleared that, that was in the last 2 years that
Right.
they cleared and built all that. So 8%, yeah, that's a lot. So that's looking at the future, right?
Right.
And that's what you guys do.
Renewable energy is a big deal. You know, Minnesota Power, I think, is under some mandates or made some commitments in terms of.
They're way ahead of schedule on going to renewables. They're at 50% renewables now.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
50% is coal and some natural gas, and the rest is
Renewable.
solar, wind power mainly. They're going more into solar now, and then they've always had hydro as a backup.
Yeah.
So they're 50% clean energy now.
So your chapter, and as one, you're good monitors of this too, right? I mean, if people want to know what's going on some of these elements in the resource area, you folks are kind of right up at the top on knowing a lot about this, aren't you?
Yeah, but that would be one of the benefits of being one of our members.
Right.
Is we.
That's what I'm saying. Now I'm talking membership now. Okay. You know, I'm saying, why do you want to belong to the Izaak Walton League? Well, you kind of cover a lot of stuff here, but the main thing is knowledge, right?
Right. We get together.
So you can talk big with your friends.
Right. A chance to meet with like-minded people.
Yeah.
Discuss this stuff, and we, you learn about it. You also learn when is a time to make some timely input on issues. You know, when there's public hearings and when there's legislation going through, we have dispersed information on, now is the time to contact your legislator if you're concerned about this legislation, about this particular issue. So those are some of the benefits of membership.
Yeah.
In addition to getting.
Okay. And this is the Outdoor America. I've seen
the
this,
national magazine. In addition
this is
to
a
getting
national
that.
magazine.
That's part of what you get as being a member as well.
This is your benefit. One of your benefits for
the national provides that.
Acquire knowledge.
Yep.
This magazine.
Yep.
And so we're getting kind of down toward the end here. We might want to talk about membership and the fact that this is a smaller group now. You don't have a lot of members, but you're always looking for more members.
You bet.
And the more members you have, the more folks you can get together and have different ideas on things, right?
And folks have
and anybody's welcome.
Bet.
I mean, let's do it, right? So if you wanted to join, you got some information here on that, don't you? We'll show this at the end here, all your information on membership and how to get into the club here and where it meets and how many, once a month?
Once a month. And our websites are also on there, the national, state, and chapter websites are there. So if you want to learn more about the organization, you can go to those websites. Listed right on there.
How long have you been, Rich, involved in the club? Since
My dad did most of the membership attending for me. I attended when I was in junior high and high school, but I didn't join until probably 15 years ago, I would say.
Okay. Now, back when your dad was, I'm sure he was president for many years, right?
Yes, he was.
Okay. How many members were back then?
Back then they had, I'd say 50, 60 members, sometimes up closer to 80. I think now, Bob, how many do we actually have?
24.
24.
24 members.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they'd have bullhead feeds with 200 people
I remember
attending.
some of those.
The ex-game warden would do the frying, and I looked on there was a dollar for adults and 50 cents for children, and they get 200 people there. And
I would have been in the late 60s.
Yeah. They also sponsored kids going to conservation camps, which our group still does.
Oh, that's one thing we should mention here, the scholarship thing.
Right.
Before we go here.
Right. We offer a scholarship every year, recent years, for one individual to go to the Ike's camp. The Izaak Walton League puts on camps in various facilities. The one we sponsor the person for is over in Deep Portage, which is west of Hackensack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been there many times. Deep is a great place. And the Izaak Walton League doesn't own that, but they sponsor it, right?
Right. We sponsor a camper, basically, one of the campers that go.
Do Izaak Walton League have camps around that they actually run and facilitate? In the country, I suppose they do.
I'm not sure. I know our members are very active in a number of the environmental camps that I'm aware of. I'm not sure of the Ike's role. I'm not aware that the Ikes actually own or run the camps.
Okay. Well, that's good information. Yeah.
One more thing to add on the history of the Ikes for the Grand Rapids chapter. We actually were involved very much in the beginning of the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, the Northern Ducks Unlimited chapter, bow hunters, but back in the 1970s, the deer herd suffered really bad losses from a cold winter, and there were a lot of starving deer. They even closed the deer season for 1 year, and the Ikes were so concerned they wanted to help the deer herd somehow, and they wanted to have a $1.50 surcharge on hunting licenses to fund forestry projects for get a younger forest, because we didn't have the logging we had then. So one kind of interesting story was that to get publicity, they decided they were going to load up 2 pickup trucks with dead deer that they found in the woods that had starved and make a point. So they headed to St. Paul, going to the Capitol. In those days, you didn't go to Minneapolis and St. Paul that much. So they pulled into town and got to St. Paul and saw this great big structure with a dome up on the hill in West St. Paul, and they drive up there with their pickup truck right up to the front steps and unload the carcasses, and they're going to go and meet the legislators, and the door opens up and here comes a priest in his frock. He said, "What can I help you with?" And he said, "We're going to the state capitol to deliver these deer to the legislators." And he said, "Well, this is the whatever church it is. It's that big church on here." He said, "The state capitol's over there." So he came down and he blessed the deer, he loaded it up, and went to the state capitol, where actually the TV men showed up and made the papers, and they got all kinds of donations coming in. That turned in, it was called Save Minnesota Deer at that point, and that became the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association.
Yes, that was. I kind of remember a little about that, but it's probably a good thing that happened. It might have raised a little
it did.
Like that. But Deer Hunter Association, a wonderful group here, and you notice a lot of members, all your members, and their are mingled between the two clubs. You know, so it's good people that are knowledgeable about the resources. And boy, that's what it is. It's knowledge, and that's basically all these leagues and chapters are trying to do is educate the public on. The best thing that we know so far, humans know so far, on how to manage wildlife. You know, wildlife management isn't that old. You know, when you look back, it started in basically just the infant stages in the late 30s, early 40s. You know, that's not that long ago to learn about how to manage all these numerous different kinds of animals that people love. They like to look at, they like to hunt, they like to eat. It's just a big job. Then you talk fish. Let's not even get into that.
And then you got chronic wasting disease coming up. You got deer hunters and the Ikes working on that.
Yeah. So here's a book here that's called The Complete Angler.
That was written by our namesake, Izaak Walton, back in the 1600s. He was an author and biographer. And the original people that founded it made reference or named it after him. That was known as probably the most environmentally significant literature
ever done.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Over time, because it was probably one of the first ones.
You know, I got a couple quotes from him. This will end the program here. I just wrote them down because I thought I looked through his book here, and a lot of it had to do with fishing. Well, it was a complete angler. That's why he was a fly fisherman.
Exactly.
I mean, this whole thing started with fly fishing. Did you see how big that's getting right now? Fly fishing, boy, it's really growing.
I'm part of it.
Yeah, and you're part of it, okay. But they have this big symposium down in the cities and showing. But here's one. Here's a couple. I've laid aside business and gone a fishing. That's a real big quote out of conservation. As no man is born an artist, so no man is born an angler. That's always good. And it says, angling may be said to be so like mathematics that it can never be fully learned. And that's true, because nobody's figured out the fish yet. And here's the last one. God never did make a more calm, quiet, innocent recreation than fishing.
That's why a lot of us fish.
This is 1600. This boy had her down. And that's why you got
Yep,
the name of your organization.
exactly.
I've got a quote by my dad here. I'd like
Oh,
to
okay.
close on.
But,
It was when he was still going to meetings when he was in his late 90s. Izaak
Sure.
Walton League hunting deer, and they interviewed him for the national magazine. And his closing, they said, "Do you have anything more to add, Wes?" And he says, "Tell my good friends in the Izaak Walton League to take good care of themselves, because the good Lord didn't make too many of them."
that sounds like him. Bob, thank you for coming in and
Thanks for giving us
giving
the
your
opportunity.
information.
That was
Rich,
Tom, thank you.
been wonderful. And folks, thank you for watching Just Outdoors. And remember, stay informed. Just Outdoors is brought to you in part by
Cheryl Hardware Hank, Deer River. Cheryl Hardware offers a broad selection of paints and sporting goods and a complete line of plumbing and electrical supplies. Cheryl Hardware, 108 Main Avenue, Deer River.